everyone. Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with our weekly update on social media. Thank you as always for joining us. I'm in an undisclosed location. So much going on, though, I thought I'd give you this special report on what's happening with our various lawsuits, our new lawsuits over the Ukraine issue, the Ukraine scandal, as I call it, JFK records, plus a new court hearing just occurred on the Fani Willis matter. First up, though, is what I think to be astonishingly good news, which is the pick of Dan Bongino, a great friend of Judicial Watch, to be the deputy director of the FBI. He essentially runs the FBI for Kash Patel in the kind of the day-to-day, in a day-to-day manner. And so between Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, we've got two powerful allies for those of us concerned about the rule of law in a position to do significant reform to the FBI. Of course, the big question is, as I ask in this clip, is the FBI salvageable? Let's listen to what I just had to say.
Kash Patel is now the FBI director. It's a remarkable development. It's positive. I hope Kash is able to reform the FBI. I don't necessarily believe that the FBI can be reformed, but if anyone can do it, it's Kash Patel. Now, just when you think it wouldn't get any better, it's announced that Kash Patel will be assisted at the FBI by Dan Bongino, who will be the deputy director. He's set to be deputy director. I don't recall if the deputy director requires Senate confirmation or not. But Dan Bongino, talk about heavy lifting. He really has been out there highlighting the abuses of the deep state and the FBI and been so forthright about it. He's got a storied law enforcement career. He's a nearly perfect fit for the position of deputy director, and he basically will be running the day-to-day operations of the FBI under Kash's direction. Now, the big question I've had, and I've raised this on my update on social media and just generally on all social media, is Kash Patel, can he save the FBI? And I don't know if the FBI can be saved. It's just been so corrupted. The raid on President Trump's home. They even came to my home to give me a subpoena, completely abusive. And they've been targeting basically the opposition to the deep state and the Democratic left machine. And the agency has been used time and time again to subvert the rule of law and subvert our constitutional republic. Now, does it mean everyone who works in the FBI is a bad guy? Of course not. That's not the issue. The issue is structurally, can it be relied upon to uphold the rule of law and advance the public interest and the public good, as opposed to subverting the rule of law and destroying the public interest and, frankly, destroying the confidence people have in the fair administration of justice.
Now, if there's anyone who can reform the FBI in a way that would be satisfactory, it would be Kash Patel. And it's doubly likely that reform happens if or with Dan Bongino on his side. And, Kash, as I've said previously, he knows what happened during Russiagate. He knows all about the illicit targeting of President Trump by the FBI and other deep state agencies. And Dan Bongino, he's been on it from the beginning. I did an interview with Dan a few years ago on the Russia, Clinton, Obama, Biden gang attack on Trump. And you'll see from this clip, Dan and I are of one mind on this illicit targeting, this lawfare against President Trump.
Spygate, I believe, is connected to the Ukrainian scandal because one of the players in it, Nellie Orr, who was working for Fusion GPS, hired by Hillary Clinton to gin up information on Trump, largely which turned out to be false, has already admitted on the record that she got information from a Ukrainian parliamentarian. Now, he denies it, Lyshenko, but she's never corrected her statement as far as I know. I mean, isn't that the very definition of foreign collusion, or am I missing something?
Oh, you're exactly right. And we have the documents Nellie Ohr laundered through her husband to the FBI and the Justice Department to try to get Trump. Ukraine appears 100+ times in those documents. So Ukraine, people should remember, Ukraine was the fulcrum upon which Russiagate was used to try to take down President Trump. Manafort had these connections in Ukraine with pro-Russian forces. The anti-Russian forces in Ukraine hated that, and so they saw a political reason to collude with Trump's opponents, Hillary Clinton, to try to make Trump look bad by exposing Manafort. And then the Department of Justice and the FBI and Mueller, to take out Trump further, wanted to use the Ukraine connections that Manafort had, information supplied to them by the Ukrainian government in part, to take out Trump.
Now, of course, the big challenge for the FBI and frankly, many of the Trump agencies is, are we going to start getting the documents that have been withheld for years by the deep state? For example, Judicial Watch has a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit that's been going on, I think, for 6 years. 6 years for the text messages of Lisa Page and Peter Strzok. Not only have they yet to turn over all the text messages that potentially would be turned over, they're withholding countless others, and they are of the position that we don't have to know why they're withholding or how many in theory are being withheld in the end ultimately until they're done doing the review, which has been going on for 6 years. It's a perfect example of where Kash Patel and Dan Bongino can come in and make a difference. But the deep state is going to object to any significant disclosures that embarrasses it. One of the big issues is the Epstein files, right? Epstein was a pedophile. He died in prison. Most significant federal prisoner, managed to, quote, commit suicide, unquote. I don't believe it was a suicide. I think there's a lot of reason to believe it wasn't a suicide. And the concern is there were folks involved with Epstein that are still out there politically in positions of power and influence who haven't been held fully accountable for engaging in the same type of conduct for which Epstein was eventually charged, which is sex trafficking. I don't know, I don't recall the specific charges, but allegations concerning sex trafficking, statutory rape, kidnapping, things like that. And supposedly there are records that detail the names of other individuals involved. Now, do those records exist one way or the other? It's unclear. We've asked repeatedly for records where you've been getting the runaround. We may sue. And there's been a lot of pressure on Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the United States, to release this information. So they had kind of an effort to get ahead of the issue by releasing what I guess binder number 1, I think it was called, or part 1 of Epstein records to some select, I guess the best way to call them is influencers. I don't mean to insult them like that, but these are folks who are, all of whom are fine patriots. Lives at TikTok, Benny Johnson, our friend, Mike Cernovich, who else? DC Drano, Rogan Hanley, another great guy, and a few others. Of course, we didn't get the documents, which is strange. But, my concern is that that type of release, it's always useful to release records. To be clear, I always want records released. But it's it's the equivalent of a public leak. So if you don't release the records pursuant to FOIA, this doesn't mean you don't release records unless there's a FOIA request. But if there's a FOIA request, what happens is when you release the records, you have to start disclosing to the requester, okay, here are some records. We're withholding information for reasons A, B, and C. There are a certain number of pages we haven't turned over. And that's the process. And that way, the requester has a better understanding of what issues are still going on with respect to secrecy. So that's what I would recommend the administration do, kind of follow the FOIA process. And doesn't have to be a FOIA out there to disclose that type of information. So I would encourage them to kind of be more regular in that regard. But that all being said, there's significant public interest in the Epstein files. Now, we had sued back in the day for records about Secret Service going with Bill Clinton on some of the flights to Epstein's Island, right? And as I recall, I guess I should look it up. The records showed that the Secret Service weren't or wasn't on any flights with Bill Clinton to Epstein's Island, which would have been strange. So, kind of another mystery that I would hope is cleared up by this administration. So, to be clear, much better transparency. I like the proactive approach of releasing the information to a group of people who have broad access to social media and public to get the information out. But because we're expert in analyzing what documents are, how they're presented by the government, whether there's questions that should be asked about whether there was a complete search, and whether there are records being withheld improperly or unnecessarily. So I want more of the latter as well. We've got to kind of do deep dives on the Epstein files, and Judicial Watch is prepared to do that. I think we're going to file a lawsuit soon on the Epstein files, because this process, we need some assurance that everything's being done that can be done to release the records. Now, Pam Bondi put out this letter that excoriated this FBI's office in the Southern District of New York in New York, which is the U.S. Attorney's office there, for supposedly finding just recently or pretending to find just recently and then withholding potentially thousands of records related to Epstein. So who's running the show now, right? It's another example, if her letter is correct, of the deep state just doesn't want the truth to come out. And if there are legitimate reasons for withholding records, you litigate it, or you explain to the public what the reasons are. And so the Epstein file saga, the Epstein record saga, is just beginning as far as we're concerned. And hopefully we are able to engage in litigation that gets the release of records in a way that reassures the public that a full and complete search has been conducted and the records fully evaluated and released to the full extent of the law. And for example, there's a lot of discretion in withholding information. I mean, they pretend, or the government would have you believe, oh, we have to withhold information. Well, that's not, some cases that may be true under law. A lot of cases it isn't. So we'll see what happens. Next up, we've got a continued assault on our Constitution from the left, from activist judges. We've had a series of rulings constraining the core presidential powers of President Trump, rulings that I think are in opposite from what the Constitution allows federal judges to do. And on top of that, you have people who have unlimited and bottomless contempt for the American people. And to that end, listen to what I believe she's a communist. I know she's a terrorist supporter too. What Ilhan Omar says.
These people are just idiots. I really, I'm at the point where it's become really hard to have an intellectual debate with any of these people, because the level of stupidity that they are displaying every single day is frankly embarrassing, not just in Congress, but as Americans, and the fact that these people are allowed to say just the most ridiculous things tells you that the dumbing of the United States has arrived, because how else do we get a Trump presidency again?
I mean, you can see I can barely watch her. I mean, if I maybe I should have just kept my back to her the entire time in the video. It's just so painful to watch. But that's who she speaks for, or what she says is typical of the left. Not only do they object, but they don't want us to speak. They don't think we should be allowed to speak. And so the Supreme Court, thankfully, jumped in, or Chief Justice Roberts jumped in, pulled back one of the most egregious aspects of, or one of the most egregious rulings related to the president's powers. But we've had a series of rulings saying the president can't fire anyone, can't control spending, can't manage foreign policy. There was a ruling requiring the president of the United States to admit foreign nationals into the United States, so-called refugees. But that's completely at odds with the constitutional prerogatives of the president. So in response to that order by the judge, this is what I said. I tweeted out, "Judicial coup. Biden judge orders real Donald Trump," is Trump's handle, "to admit refugees into the United States." Then Elon Musk retweeted that tweet, or reposted. I guess they're no longer tweets because it's called X. "What is the point of having democratic elections if unelected activist judges can override the clear will of the people? Well, that's no democracy at all." And so between that and my tweet, there were 43 million views because Musk has such a massive following. But Musk raises a fair point. This is about democracy in the traditional sense of the word. Yes, I know we're a constitutional republic, but when judges steal self-government, right, steal our liberty, our right to govern ourselves by pretending or acting as if they're the president or the legislature, that upends democracy in a core way. And so these cases are going to wind their way through the courts. And I'm hoping they are shut down, the worst of them, sooner rather than later, because we're in a crisis. A lot of Trump's executive actions are designed to address that crisis. And whether it be on the border, whether it be in spending, or whether it be in just getting political control back, power to the people over the bureaucrats that seem to have taken over much of what Washington, D.C. does. We're supposed to be governed by our elected representatives, not an unelected, unaccountable class of Mandarin bureaucrats. And that's, I believe, what's happening, and Trump rightly sees right through that. And so Judicial Watch will continue to monitor these court rulings, examine who's behind them. Like, for example, Judicial Watch in our Corruption Chronicles examines that the Soros uncovers and reports out that the Soros operation is funding a lot of those who are challenging the Trump key administration, PEOs or administrative moves. And if you go to our website, let me go to our website. And here's the headline: "The Soros-funded group sues Trump for cutting aid of another nonprofit bankrolled by the leftist billionaire." So this is the way things are now. A Soros funds a group who represents another group funded by Soros who wants money from USAID. Highlighting the need to crack down on waste on the nation's famously corrupt global aid agency, a group funded by left-wing billionaire George Soros is suing the Trump administration for freezing the funds of another nonprofit also bankrolled by Soros that receives millions of dollars from the USAID. With a massive budget of around $40 billion, the agency has for years come under fire for the outrageous programs it funds with taxpayer dollars, including hundreds of millions to promote Soros's radical globalist agenda in Latin America, a failed Clinton-backed port and power plant in Haiti, a project to help Asians learn enough English to work in offshore call centers, and to develop a Pakistani version of the iconic educational children's program Sesame Street. Other USAID allocations have paid for a condom strategy in Eswatini, bicycles for rural communities in sub-Saharan Africa, and racial equity. Vice President Harris's failed multi-million-dollar venture to curb irregular migration, remember she was the border czar, was also funded through USAID. And now, of course, whenever Trump wants to enforce the rule of law and protect taxpayers, there's always a leftist to oppose him and court, and that's their right to go to court, but there's got to be, I think, a fuller public analysis of what's happening in these courts, and that's what Judicial Watch is doing through our investigative efforts. The lawsuit that challenged USAID funding constraints was filed by a group called Public Citizen that's received $2.46 million from the Soros Open Society Foundations since 2020. Records uncovered by Judicial Watch reveal the DC-based group describes itself as a consumer advocacy organization that champions the public interest in the halls of power. And Public Citizen's been around for years. It's kind of a pillar group on the left, and sometimes they do some interesting work. But let's be clear: Soros is a key funder, and they're a creature of the left. We defend democracy, resist corporate power, and fight to ensure that government works for the people, not big corporations, according to its website. One of the plaintiffs in that lawsuit is another Soros project, hardcore left group called the Journalism Development Network, which received $4.4 million from the Soros Foundations in 2023 alone, according to records uncovered by Judicial Watch. Now, you would think the media, so if Judicial Watch was suing to stop an administration from doing something, how do you think they would characterize the media, our work? They'd say extreme right-wing group, blah, 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 right? So there have all these leftist activist groups, all these leftist unions suing to stop, sometimes unsuccessfully, to the credit of some courts, Trump's remarkable efforts to reform government in just 40 days, more or less at this point, right? And media just pretends that it's perfectly normal and these groups are all mainstream. Well, they're not. They're extremist groups from the left. This Journalism Development Network claims to support a global consortium of journalists, and they've also received $6.5 million from the State Department and USAID. So this far left group is a joint operation of the Biden regime, USAID, State Department, and the Soros operation. They've received that money since 2020. USAID has been a disaster from administration through administration. Trump people tried to curtail it a little bit, didn't get very far. And of course, Trump came roaring back into office, trying to take this on more directly. And the Journalism Development Network is the corporate name of the vehemently anti-Trump organized crime and corruption reporting project, and the two operate under the same employee identification number in official IRS records obtained by Judicial Watch. Of course, they say cutting off their money is illegal. Of course, they'd say that. The recently filed lawsuit has another plaintiff, a New York-based nonprofit called AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition that strives for a world without AIDS. Admirable goal. This is the catch to make you understand exactly what they say, what they really want, and with global health equity. What is global health equity? Everyone gets sick and no one can be taken care of because the government's taken over and controlled medicine. That is exactly what they mean. So this great investigative work by Judicial Watch highlighting the truth behind the Soros USAID connections. And of course, as I said previously, it's not just current, it's been for years. The Soros operations have been working hand in glove with USAID and even the State Department. And so we're just getting to the tip of the iceberg in all of this. And, USAID is also heavily involved in Ukraine. And before I get to that, I mean, I'm sure you saw the news today. You had this extraordinary meeting between the president of Ukraine, Zelenskyy. He came to the White House supposedly to cement a deal related to minerals that would have, kind of cemented an alliance between the United States and Ukraine, because the minerals have some significant strategic and value to us and to our economy. And you would have thought that would have been like a great victory for the Ukraine, the people of Ukraine, so many of whom have fought bravely against the Russian invaders, and the Trump administration, which has been critical of, rightly so in my view, the tens and hundreds of billions of dollars that have been sent to Ukraine, given the outcome of the war thus far, for no good end. My view on the Biden administration is they don't want the Russians to win, but they also didn't want the Russians to lose. And the whole Ukraine invasion took place in part because the Russians thought they had Biden's number, because Biden had been on the take and everyone knew about it, including being on the take from Ukrainian/Russian interests. And so Trump was right to question how the war has been conducted, right to say, look, either someone's going to win or we're going to want peace. Looks like no one's going to win. We're not going to throw money into, just a grinder of lives lost. Let's figure out a way out. And one of the ways to do that is to be serious about either waging the conflict and supporting those who are defending their home in Ukraine, or just ending it through hardcore negotiations. So Zelenskyy had an opportunity today, and he shows up at the White House and gets into a fight with Trump. And, I'm going to talk about a press, we just sued the USAID for Ukraine aid. And you can see there are kind of major issues with Ukraine in this clip, and I react to it by highlighting our work to uncover the corruption. Let's run it.
You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country, that's back to you, far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once? This entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said...
Well, Judicial Watch sued today for records about waste, fraud, and abuse with the billions in aid given to Zelenskyy by the Biden regime. So there will be some accountability if Judicial Watch has anything to do with it.
That was a pretty incredible moment, wasn't it? And, you don't mess with Trump. And Zelenskyy is... I don't know how he can remain as president of Ukraine. We'll see. Trump, despite his reputation as a nice guy, and he sometimes forgives people, and he may forgive Zelenskyy for his coming in here and insulting him and, pretending to tell the American people what they must do as opposed to what he's asking them to do with hat in hand. And so his performance was awful. It was truly awful. And to me, it just raises, as I note in the video, just more questions about where the money's being spent. I really think we need to get a fuller accounting of how this money's been spent, certainly if we're to proceed with additional funds. And that's why Judicial Watch filed an important lawsuit for information about USAID funding on aid to Ukraine. The Judicial Watch filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit against USAID for records regarding waste, fraud, and abuse tied to aid money sent to Ukraine. And this is the key request. Any reported allegations of sexual exploitation, abuse, or trafficking of migrants fleeing Ukraine and or receiving assistance from USAID inside Ukraine, any third-party monitoring contractors or NGOs, now non-governmental organizations, reporting potential fraud associated with USAID aid to Ukraine, any reported allegations of direct cash assistance program fraud or attempts to conduct cash transactions in Russian rubles associated with USAID aid in Ukraine, and any USAID branded commodities appearing for sale in the open market or outside of response to outside of response activities in Ukraine. Now, they never gave us the records. They cited unusual circumstances. And we had 2 requests. And, it's again, I keep on saying, is we get the hand to the face from the deep state on these records. So this is a good opportunity for Trump to come in and say, yeah, what was going on with USAID money for Ukraine? In December 2023, the agency's inspector general issued a fraud warning, citing conflicts of interest in USAID's Ukraine response. So they said, look, a USAID, for instance, prime awardee executing a multi-purpose cash assistance program. Can you imagine cash assistance from any government agency? How rife for fraud that is, especially abroad. Discovered that an employee of a sub-awardee was simultaneously a registered beneficiary of the program and tasked with confirming beneficiary eligibility. Oh, I get cash and I can help direct it by confirming eligibility of others. The prime awardee reported the matter to the OIG, which determined that the sub-awardee did not have a conflict of interest policy in place to prevent an employee from participating in administered programs as beneficiaries. So we didn't even have the basic rules in place to protect against fraud. If you're getting money and you have an interest in the money flowing, and you're approving money not only potentially for yourself, but your buddies, I mean, that's obviously not something that's appropriate. Another example, USAID prime awardee determined that a sub-awardee's procurement official had an unreported ongoing personal relationship with a bidder. That's one way to get a bid approved for U.S. tax dollars. Have a relationship with the person making the decision. According to another USAID Inspector General's report, the agency did not vet humanitarian groups it funded to prevent sexual abuse of Ukrainian war victims. According to the UN, approximately 90% of the nearly 6.5 million people who fled the country are women and children, with women, of course, being at greatest risk of sexual exploitation and abuse, human trafficking, and forced prostitution. In 2022, we issued an advisory, this is the IG saying, noticing an advisory notice highlighting key considerations for USAID's developing humanitarian response led by its Bureau of Humanitarian Associated Assistance, which included risks of these terrible abuses of women. However, more than a year later, we had not received any allegations related to the sexual abuse of women, which raised concerns that cases were underreported, you would think. So we spent money, at least I don't see it here, to help protect women in Ukraine who basically were fleeing the conflict zone from being sexually assaulted and abused and raped, prostituted. So we spent money to protect all those people and guarantee protection. And there's no evidence anyone was ever targeted. Not one woman was helped or was hurt, which means that that the money, so the IG suggests, well, maybe we're doing underreporting, or maybe the money wasn't spent the way they said they spent it. This is why Judicial Watch sued. President Trump on January 20th ordered a 90-day pause in the United States foreign development assistance for assessment of programmatic efficiencies and consistency with United States foreign policy. Money that has no checks in place or insufficient checks in place, tax money, your tax money, money that you worked to earn, taken by the federal government, being spent willy-nilly in Ukraine. You know how much Ukraine has gotten from USAID since the invasion? $35 billion. To say the number is to kind of highlight the absurdity or the how incredible it is that we could possibly spend that amount of money in a way that realistically or practically had any fraud checks in place. No doubt about it that fraud was taking place. And that's why we're suing in court to get the records. You know, and of course, Ukraine has been at the center of the storm when it came to the abuse and targeting Trump. And because Biden was linked to the corruption there, they were trying to protect Biden, and the Ukrainian government was even targeting Trump as well with attacks. So it's a corrupt country. I know some of you may say, "Oh, we got to defend them against Russia." That's a different debate about whether or not we make sure that the money that is supposed to help defend them. And I don't think USAID helps defend them at all, frankly. It's a money laundering operation for friendlies in Ukraine who are either corruptly connected or ideologically connected to the transnational left. They're just taking care of their friends. Now, I'm sure some money ends up helping someone. You spend $35 billion, someone's going to get a cracker. But you know how it works. And this is why Judicial Watch's lawsuit's important. We've been investigating USAID, exposing its corruption for years. Thank heavens, and God bless Donald Trump for taking it on directly. And this is, as I say in our press release, the American people deserve an immediate and full accounting of the billions of dollars that the Biden USAID sent to Ukraine. USAID is a notoriously corrupt agency, and we hope that the Trump administration, through our Judicial Watch lawsuit, brings transparency on this key issue. And frankly, the collapse of the Ukraine talks with Zelenskyy highlight the importance of finding out where the money went in Ukraine. So once again, Judicial Watch at the tip of the spear on another important public policy issue. So much going on. So just before this report to you, I was on a Zoom participating virtually in a state court hearing in Fulton County, Georgia, on the Fani Willis documents scandal that Judicial Watch uncovered. As you may recall, Judicial Watch filed a Freedom of Information or Open Records Act lawsuit in Georgia against Fani Willis after she didn't turn over any documents or responded responded with as I keep on saying, a hand to the face for our request about documents with detailing any collusion she had to get Trump with Jack Smith operation and the Pelosi January 6th operation. And more or less, she said, 3, 4, 5 times, I don't have documents. And even worse, she didn't even show up in court to answer our complaint. So she was found in default. The court noted that the searches were just not real searches at all. She admitted that there were documents after telling us and the court repeatedly there were no documents. The court ordered her to pay Judicial Watch's fees, attorney's fees and costs, so her operation had to pay us nearly $22,000, but we still don't have the documents. So the judge, and we've been asking for a special master, which would be a judicial appointed individual, usually like a retired judge or expert lawyer, who would oversee a legitimate search of records. And so, they tell us they have no records about the collusion. And then they say, oh, we do have records about the collusion. And the only record they released was the one that we sent to them to show that when you say you have no records, you're lying, because Fani Willis herself wrote a letter to the head of the January 6th committee. Then they come back and say, oh, we did find records after all. Today at the hearing, in a hearing over our request for a special master, they said they did another search, and now there are 212 pages of records. Can you believe it? So they went from having 0 records to 212 pages of records about their collusion with the Pelosi January 6th operation to get Trump. The court, during the hearing, held in abeyance our request for a special master. I think he's hesitant to do that. It's extraordinary in some ways, but on the other hand, this is an extraordinary circumstance. Never in Judicial Watch's history of hundreds of Freedom of Information Act lawsuits has a government agency been found in default because they couldn't be bothered to show up to answer the lawsuit. It's incredible. And on top of that, they did multiple searches, pretended not to find anything, or did fake searches. And then they, telling us they have no records, and then they discover records. Each search, they find seemingly more records. And now we know they're 212 pages when they said they had 0 pages to begin with. All those circumstances suggest they can't be trusted to tie their own shoes, let alone search for records in an honest way, hence our request for a special master. But in the meantime, the judge says, you know what, I'm going to look at these documents because you're telling Judicial Watch they can't have any of them. It's 212 pages. I can look at them directly. So Fani Willis today, her lawyers admitted that they have 212 pages on collusion targeting Trump. Now, they're not going to say it was collusion targeting Trump. That's my term. But I'm fairly describing what the issue is. They were coordinating with the January 6th committee on the unprecedented prosecutions of Trump, not for doing anything illegal, in my view, but for exercising his core First Amendment rights, his obligations under his oath of office as President of the United States to make sure the elections were run correctly in Georgia. So again, Judicial Watch's heavy lifting repeatedly gets more and more results with this Fani Willis scandal. So Fani Willis admits to having documents. She's forced to pay us $22,000. We find out the documents are even more than anyone had previously admitted to, 212 pages. And the court said, I want to look at the documents. Here is where the court essentially directed or told our lawyers, our Judicial Watch lawyers, and the government what he was going to do, which is to order the records be turned over to him for review. Let's go here and listen to what the judge said.
Have I said things that leave either side with a lack of clarity as to what's happening next? Because I don't mean for that. I know it's a little bit amorphous because you want some time, Mr. Monroe, to consult with your client and flesh out, here's what I, meaning plaintiff petitioner, would like to see in this affidavit describing how the search was conducted. I'll enter an order that says I'm taking this under the 212 pages in camera to review that. So that's in the record. It's in the transcript right now, but that ought to be demarcated on this date. County attorney, you got 4 days to bring me the documents, or 48 hours, or whatever it is. And then we'll all know where those are. Because if I get distracted by something else that maybe happened in 2024 and there's someone sitting in jail, then you'd be able to say, Judge, you've been sitting on only 212 pages for a month. That's 12 hours a page. Let's go. And I'll say, you're right. I got to turn back to that. But at least there'll be that marker saying, here's where we are in the process.
So right now, we don't know what the documents are, what they say. There are all sorts of privileges being asserted. Whether we can smash through the wall to get to the privileges, to get to the documents and overcome these exemption assertions is kind of going to be another matter. But the fact is, we now know hundreds of pages of documents exist detailing collusion between Fani Willis, and the Pelosi operation. So that's a big victory for accountability. And it's more than the media's done. I don't know where the Justice Department is on all of this. I think they're going too slow generally on everything I care about, and meaning from Judicial Watch's perspective. And I hope they get up to speed. It's only been a month or so, but still, the Republic's continuing to be under attack. I mean, that charge in Georgia was so abusive and so, in my view, deserving of criminal investigation. And now there are records that I think could reflect on whether a criminal investigation is warranted of Fani Willis's operation. And not only that, whether there should be investigations of what the January 6th committee was up to up here in Washington, D.C., when they were abusing their powers to ferret out information to help prosecutors target their political enemies, namely Donald Trump and other innocents. So another victory for the rule of law today at this court hearing in the Fani Willis matter. So there's a lot of news this week about the Epstein records, where they are, why they haven't been fully released, whether the FBI is hiding records. The other big issue that the public has an interest in is the assassination of JFK. Now, to be clear, I don't know what happened with the JFK assassination other than what I read in the history books, right? And my instinct is it was as what was said, which is that it was that Oswald shot him. And I think the left would like nothing more than to make Americans believe that the CIA or the U.S. government was involved in some way, because if they weren't, they're left holding the bag, right? Because it was a Marxist trained in Russia who was a leftist who murdered the president. I mean, that's what the current story is, right? That's what the official investigations have found. Now, many people have legitimate questions about the scope of that investigation, whether all leads were sufficiently followed. It's the government. They're not to be trusted. Things need to be verified. And so people want more and more information about the JFK assassination. And, some people may say, well, there's no reason to get the information. Well, what's wrong with asking? We have a right to know under the law, and records shouldn't be withheld unlawfully. Now, not only that, but President Trump has recently, one of his first acts was to order the release of the JFK records. The records haven't been released. So Judicial Watch just sued for the JFK assassination files, at least the records that have yet to be released. We filed the lawsuit against the National Archives and Records Administration, NARA, and we filed the lawsuit after they failed to respond to our January request for all previously unreleased records in the possession of the Archives and Records Administration regarding the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. The request includes, but is not limited to, all records transferred to NARA by the Assassination Records Review Board. So this is where the records reside for, the key records reside for the key federal investigations. Now, President Trump, I think it was his first day of office, January 19th, that was the day he was inaugurated, announced his intention to make public the remaining records related to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And he followed up that announcement from the 19th with an executive order on January 23rd. And this is what President Trump ordered. More than 50 years after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the federal government has not released to the public all of its records related to these events. Their families and the American people deserve transparency and truth. It is in the national interest to finally release all records related to these assassinations without delay. The President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992 required all records related to the assassination of President Kennedy to be publicly disclosed to the public by October 26, 2017. Unless the president certifies that continued postponement is made necessary by identifiable harm to the military defense, intelligence operations, law enforcement, or conduct of formulations, and the identifiable harm is of such gravity that it weighs the public's interest in disclosure. I have determined that the continued redaction and withholding of information from records pertaining to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy is not consistent with the public interest, and the release of these records is long overdue. And although no act of Congress directs the release of information pertaining to the assassinations of RFK and Dr. Martin Luther King, I've determined that the release of all records in federal government's possession pertaining to each of these assassinations is also in the public interest. Within 15 days of this order, the Director of National Intelligence and the Attorney General shall, in coordination with the Assistant to the President of National Security Affairs and the Council of the President, present a plan to the President for the full and complete release of records relating to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Well, I mean, I think that's good, but there's no reason the archives can't release the records. Where's the plan? Why isn't the archives implementing it? We want the records. We know what we're doing. We know what records are generally releasable under law. The president's authorized the release. In this EO, he said more than enough to authorize the complete release. And it's another example of a deep state agency, in this case, NARA, the National Records and Archives Administration. This is the same agency that tried to put Trump in jail over a records dispute. Remember the raid on Mar-a-Lago? It's because, in part, of this gang over at NARA. So it's no surprise they're ignoring the president's directives in ordering and in refusing to release these records to Judicial Watch about the JFK assassination. As I say in our release, despite overwhelming public interest, many records about the JFK assassination remain secret. These records can and should be released under FOIA so that the American people are assured the deep state isn't playing games and ignoring President Trump's transparency orders. Now, we've asked for records previously indirectly on JFK assassination. In 2022, what was the date? Now I don't remember what the date was. I don't think it was against the archives, but we've helped someone previously try to get records that were, I think, in the RFK library. Now I'm going on memory here, which is dangerous. So the RFK library had records, and the library is a federal agency or a federal effort about the JFK assassination, and we had to kind of sue to get them to make certain information available to us about, or to the person we were helping, about the JFK assassination. So this is an issue we've been working around for several years. And so we know there's this public interest. We know the president wants the records. And in our experience, the best way to ensure records are released is to sue for them. And I had this video explaining what we did.
Hey everyone, Judicial Watch just sued in federal court for the JFK assassination files. We filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the National Archives. They ignored our request, so right now we're in federal court under the Freedom of Information Act for the records that have yet to be released to the American people. It's frustrating the deep state National Archives hasn't followed through yet on President Trump's orders for full transparency, though frankly the best way to ensure full transparency is to be in federal court like Judicial Watch is. Our heavy lifting is second to none for getting records from the government under law. And this way, for instance, the National Archives is going to have to tell the court what records they are releasing, what records they're hiding, and why, and justify that under law.
So come back here, be sure to come back here in the following few weeks and frankly, few months to find out what happens with the JFK records, what's happening with the Epstein records, what's happening with the USAID Ukraine records, what's happened with the lawfare targeting Trump and the judicial coups against him. All of this Judicial Watch is tracking, opposing in court where we can, always educating the American people, and always thanks to your support. I'll see you here next time on the Judicial Watch Weekly Update.
Thanks for watching.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.